Welcome back, everyone. In today's episode, I've got 8 true terrifying thunderstorm horror stories that'll make you look at the next storm a little differently. These are real experiences from people who went through something they'll never forget. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, drop a like, and share it with someone who enjoys a good scare. Thank you all for being here. Now, let's get into it. My name's Elliot. The power went out halfway through my overnight shift at the Crisis Response Center. Nights like that, it's just the skeleton crew, me at the front desk with the headset, and Marcus, the shift supervisor, somewhere in the back office. He was supposed to be doing inventory and end-of-shift reports, but realistically, he was probably watching some old sci-fi rerun with the sound barely on. I didn't mind. We didn't talk much after 6 anyway. The phone lines, thankfully, ran on their own power system, hardwired, independent. That was one of the few things they drilled into us during training. No matter what happens, the calls never stop coming. I had my notes across my lap, headset tilted over one ear, and a little LED flashlight clipped to my collar. The beam barely reached the edge of my notepad, casting my writing in a faint yellow glow. The pen kept skipping from the humidity. The storm outside pressed against the windows like a slow, steady breath. Nights like this were quiet, which isn't always good in our line of work, but I didn't mind the silence. It was 9:42 when the line blinked, a single call cutting through the empty air. I clicked in, voice falling into the routine I'd practiced 100 times. "Crisis line, this is Elliot. How can I help you tonight?" No answer, just a faint rush of noise. I thought it was static, a bad connection, maybe even a wind-whipped pocket dial. But then I heard it, breathing. Not loud, not panicked, just steady, shallow, right against the receiver. "Hello?" I asked. "Can you hear me?" A boy's voice came through. No hesitation, no emotion, just a flat, distant statement. "I don't know where I am." He didn't sound frightened or lost, just eerily calm. His tone was too deliberate, like someone reciting something they'd memorized long ago. "What's your name?" I asked gently. He paused. "They told me it was Thursday, but I don't think that's right. I don't think I'm in the house anymore." That caught my attention. I straightened, glancing toward the hallway, where Marcus's office light glowed dimly under the door. I pressed the flag button on my console, signaling a potential trace, though I already knew it wouldn't do much. Still, habit. "How old are you?" I asked. 11, he said. Then after a beat, "My hands are still wet." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. Not the words themselves, but the casualness of it. Like he was listing random facts, trying to put his world back in order. "Are you hurt?" I asked. "No." "Yeah," said. "I think I was eating dinner, but then I wasn't." His voice didn't waver, but there was a strange distance to it, like he was remembering a scene from someone else's life. I turned slightly and waved toward Marcus's office window, but he didn't look up. The movie must have still been playing. I flipped open my notepad, started writing everything down manually. "Do you know where you are now?" I asked. "Can you see anything around you?" "There's a window," he said after a pause. "It's dark outside, but sometimes there's lightning." "What do you see when it flashes?" He hesitated. "A driveway, but not the same one. The other one was straight. This one curves. There's a mailbox with blue numbers on it." "What numbers?" "They change." I stopped writing. "The numbers change?" "Yes." His voice was flat, final. My stomach turned slightly, but I kept my tone even. "Can you describe the house you're in?" "There are two doors," he said softly. "One in the front, one inside the living room. But the front door doesn't work." "What do you mean it doesn't work?" "When I look at it too long," he said, "it gets farther away." I froze, pen hovering over the page. I hadn't realized I'd stopped writing until I felt the ink drying on the tip. "Are you inside right now?" I asked. "I was," he said. Then I opened the second door, the one in the living room. There's rain behind it. But when I walk through, I'm back inside again. The carpet's wet. I keep walking, and it starts over. The line crackled softly. I glanced at the console. No origin number, just blank. No trace, no signal source. "Where are your parents?" I asked. "They were with me at dinner," he said. "Now I only hear them in the thunder." My fingers tightened around the pen. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of static through my headset. Down the hall, one of the emergency lights started buzzing. "What's your name again?" I asked. There was a long pause, then a faint tapping, like fingertips brushing glass. "I don't remember," he whispered. "I think the rain took it." My heart kicked hard once, but I kept my voice calm. "Can you tell me what else you see in the room? Furniture? Your clothes? Anything outside the window?" "Sometimes I see a road," he said. "Sometimes I don't. When the thunder's louder, there are people on the lawn." "What kind of people?" "They don't have faces," he said. "But one of them is holding my plate." The line hissed sharply, then dropped to a low hum. My palms were slick on the headset. It wasn't fear exactly. It was deeper, like my body knew something my mind didn't. "There's something wrong with the thunder," he murmured. "It sounds like it's behind my head." I swallowed hard. "Can you look at the window again?" He whispered so softly I almost missed it. "It's not glass anymore." Then the line cut. No click, no static, just gone. For a full minute, I sat there, headset limp in my hand, staring at the dead console. When I finally stood, the hallway behind me was black. The overhead light above the break room flickered, strobing the tile in irregular bursts. I walked back and knocked on Marcus's office door. No response. I opened it. The chair was empty. The small TV on his desk was frozen on a black screen with white text. No signal. I tried the internal line. Dead. That's when one of the emergency lights exploded with a loud pop, shards of plastic raining down beside me. I flinched hard, heart pounding. That was enough. I wasn't staying another second. I grabbed my coat, stuffed the notepad into my bag, and headed for the front exit. The latch jammed twice before it finally gave. The metal handle felt sticky, warm, almost like skin. Outside, the storm was roaring. The rain came down in sheets, washing out the world beyond the steps. The air smelled like iron and wet pavement. I waited under the awning, counted to 30, then sprinted for my car. When I turned the engine on, the radio screamed to life at full volume, a wall of static so loud it made my teeth ache. I reached to shut it off, but froze when I heard it. Beneath the noise, faint but unmistakable. I don't know where I am. The same voice, the same calm tone. I turned the key, killing the engine. The sudden silence was suffocating. Rain hammered the windshield, blurring everything beyond it. My phone was dead, wouldn't light up, no matter how long I held the button. I sat there until the worst of the storm passed. When I turned the ignition again, the static was gone. Just a faint hum, like nothing had happened. I drove home without stopping. For a week, I didn't go back. Every night, I told myself it was exhaustion, or a trick of stress and weather. But deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining it. When I finally returned to the center, I brought my notes. The new supervisor, Renee, looked them over and frowned. She checked the logs. No incoming call at that time. No trace, no origin, no data. Just an empty block of static where the record should have been. Maybe you nodded off, she said. Dreamed it. But I hadn't. That night when I left, I drove past the edge of town toward the winding ridges of the Blue Ridge Mountains, the same storm clouds hanging low over the peaks. Somewhere out there, I thought I saw a faint flash, lightning against a dark silhouette of a curved driveway, and for just a moment, through the rain-specked glass of my car window, I swore I saw a mailbox. Blue numbers, changing. And behind it, just for a second when the thunder rolled, a figure stood motionless on a slick patch of grass, small, faceless, holding a dinner plate in both hands. When I blinked, it was gone. The rain started again, and somewhere beneath the sound of it, muffled through the hiss of static, a calm, familiar voice whispered once more, I don't know where I am. My parents were gone that weekend. Some family thing down in Georgia, a cousin's engagement or something, and I decided to stay home. Senior year had just started, and I needed a quiet couple of days to catch up on assignments and projects. It wasn't unusual. I'd stayed home plenty of times before. We lived just outside a small town near Boone, North Carolina, tucked between long ridges and quiet stretches of forest that always felt a little too still when the sun went down. That Friday evening, the air felt strange even before the storm hit, heavy like the world was holding its breath. Around 8:15, I was in the kitchen, half working on a history essay, phone playing some background music on low volume. When the first rumble of thunder rolled through the valley, it shook the windows in their frames. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. I remember looking out through the kitchen window and seeing the trees bend, their shadows stretching unnaturally long across the backyard as lightning lit them up. The kind of storm that didn't feel like it came from the sky. It felt like it came from the ground. By 10:10, I was upstairs. The rain was pelting the windows so hard, it sounded like gravel. Thunder rattled the dresser drawers, and every time lightning flashed, it painted the walls white for a second, and then swallowed everything back into pitch black. Normally, storms didn't bother me, but this one did. It wasn't the volume or the power, it was the rhythm. The thunder didn't roll right. It came in uneven pulses, offbeat, like something mimicking thunder and getting it just slightly wrong. Before heading to bed, I double-checked the front and back doors, not because I was scared, but because I couldn't shake this strange unease, like the house itself had exhaled and was waiting for me to notice. At 10:45, I was in bed watching some old mystery series on my laptop, subtitles on, volume barely audible under the rain. Then I heard it. Not thunder, not creaking wood, something else. A single quick knock from downstairs. Clean. Too clean to be wind. I paused the video, listening. The sound didn't repeat. I told myself it was the house shifting. The place was old, built in the 70s, and sometimes the walls made noises that didn't belong to any real reason. I brushed it off and went back to watching. By 11:33, everything went black. The lights, the laptop, even the clock on the nightstand blinked off at the same time. And for a heartbeat, even the storm seemed to pause, like the entire world had been muted. Then the thunder came back, louder, closer, shaking the window panes. I reached for my phone, flicked on the flashlight. and sighed. Power outages weren't new. The lines out here were ancient. I'd done the flashlight and candles thing plenty of times before. I slipped on my slippers and made my way downstairs, each step creaking under my weight, in a house suddenly too big and too dark. The glow from my phone barely reached past my feet. I grabbed the backup flashlight from the kitchen drawer, its metallic click sounding painfully loud in the silence. The fuse box was in the laundry room, tucked behind a stack of detergent jugs and cleaning supplies. Every switch was still in place. Nothing tripped, just darkness, steady and unbroken. I sent a quick text to Mom, told her the power was out. A few minutes later, she replied, "We'll call the electric company. Stay calm, keep the doors locked." I was on my way back through the kitchen when I saw it. The back door wasn't open, but it wasn't shut either. The handle was locked, but the door itself hung just slightly ajar, maybe an inch gap. The darkness of the yard beyond it visible like an open mouth. I froze. I knew. I'd locked it earlier. I'd felt the bolt catch, heard the sound. I never did it halfway. Slowly, I pressed it shut until it clicked and locked again. Then, I just stood there with my ear against the cold wood, not breathing. Nothing but wind, rain. Maybe a tree branch shifting. I convinced myself it was the latch sticking. The door swelled when it rained. It always had. That was probably it. I went back upstairs, trying to shake it off. I turned the flashlight toward the ceiling, trying to read a few pages of something, just to get my mind away from that stupid door. But my thoughts kept circling back, tracing that gap in my head again and again. Then I heard it. 3 knocks. Not from downstairs this time. From the hallway outside my bedroom. Soft at first. 1, pause, 2 more. The rhythm almost thoughtful. But the sound wasn't right. It wasn't hollow, like knuckles on wood. It was muffled, like someone knocking through fabric. I froze, staring at my ceiling. My mouth went dry. Finally, I stood, holding the phone like it could protect me. The hallway was empty, pale in the beam of light. The attic hatch was right above the landing, closed, perfectly flush with the ceiling. Nothing out of place. I stared up at it for what felt like forever. Then, 3 more knocks. Louder this time. Sharp. Real. Something hit the panel hard enough to make the frame shudder. I stepped backward into my room without realizing it, shut the door, didn't bother locking it. It never latched right anyway. I sat on the floor, back against the door, flashlight aimed at the crack underneath. Nothing. No movement. The storm had filled the silence again, steady and distant. I called my mom. She answered on the first ring, voice tense. I didn't even try to sound calm. I told her everything. The power, the door, the attic. She went quiet for a few seconds, then asked softly, "Is the deadbolt on the front door locked?" I stood, heart thudding, walked to check. It wasn't. I'd locked the handle, yes, but not the bolt. I turned it. The sound loud as a gunshot in the stillness. Mom told me to stay on the line. She was calling Mr. Landry, our neighbor. He lived across the gravel road and had a key. She said he'd come over right away. That's when I heard it. A dragging sound above me. Long, heavy, like something being pulled across wood. But there wasn't wood up there, just beams, insulation, and dust. Nothing could move like that without falling through, unless it wasn't walking, unless it was crawling. I whispered to Mom what I heard. Her voice cracked. She told me to stay still, to not move, that she was calling the police too. I could hear her crying quietly between words, the kind of trembling breath you don't fake. My phone battery flashed red, 8%. I went back to my room, sitting under the faint square outline of the attic hatch. I hadn't realized before. It wasn't in the hallway. It was right above me. I stared at it, the pale outline barely visible in the flashlight's beam, and waited for it to move again. It didn't, not for a while. Then, downstairs, something crashed. Loud, like a chair tipping, wood splitting against tile. I didn't move. Then, through the rain, through the hum of air so thick it felt alive, I heard a voice. Someone calling my name. It was a man's voice, muffled by the storm, but familiar. The neighbor. I bolted from my room, feet slipping on the stairs, nearly dropping the flashlight. When I reached the bottom, he was there, standing at the front door with a heavy flashlight in one hand and a crowbar in the other. He looked at me once, then moved through the house without saying a word. He checked every room. Then the attic. When he came back down, he looked pale. He said he didn't see anything, but his eyes kept drifting to the ceiling. I followed his gaze. The attic hatch was open. Not much, just an inch, enough to break the seal. It hadn't been like that before. He stayed with me until the power came back. 3:07 a.m. I remember because I stared at the oven clock the moment it flickered back on. We sat in silence, both pretending not to listen for another sound. When my parents got home the next afternoon, my dad installed a real latch on the attic panel, metal bolts drilled deep into the frame. He joked about raccoons, but I could tell from the way his hands shook that he didn't believe that any more than I did. Nothing was missing from the house. No signs of a break-in, no footprints, not even a shift in the dust above the attic ladder. But I don't sleep the same anymore. When the storms roll through the Blue Ridge foothills, I keep the lights on. And sometimes, when the thunder gets uneven, when it comes in threes, I swear I hear something faint, almost polite, tapping softly against the ceiling, like it's waiting to be let in. My shift at the Ridgeway Freight Center started at 4:30 p.m., just like every other evening that week. By 5:30, the wind outside had begun to roar through the Blue Ridge foothills, hammering against the side panels hard enough to make the steel beams groan. Storm warnings had been buzzing on everyone's phones since mid-afternoon, but the work didn't stop for bad weather. We were understaffed again, same story as always, and I got stuck covering Sector E, the farthest and oldest wing of the warehouse, the one that everyone tried to avoid if they could. Most nights it sat half dark and half forgotten, its walls lined with dust-coated skids and rusting shelving. They only opened it up when orders backed up so badly that there was no other choice. By the time 6:45 rolled around, the storm was in full swing. The thunder didn't just rumble. It slammed down like it was trying to split the sky open. The rain sounded like gravel pelting the roof. I was halfway through scanning a batch of boxes when the overhead lights started to flicker. Not the random kind of flicker you see when a ballast goes bad, but that rhythmic pulse, on and off, slower and slower, until the light settled into this dull amber haze that made everything around me look like it was underwater. My handheld scanner lost Wi-Fi next. The red signal light blinked in short, panicked bursts, beeping like a heartbeat that couldn't quite keep time. Somewhere in the distance, I could still hear the hum of conveyors from Sector D, faint and steady, like a reminder that the world hadn't entirely stopped. But in Sector E, it was different. The air was thick and still, not quiet in a peaceful way, but quiet like a place that didn't want to be disturbed. I told myself it was just the storm. Box, scan, stack, repeat. That was all I had to do. Then the intercom crackled, a sharp pop of static. We never used the intercom unless it was for emergencies or for calling drivers to the dock, and this wasn't either. It sounded like someone had pressed the talk button and just held it. A faint hiss of white noise that made me freeze mid-scan. After a few seconds, it clicked off. I waited. Then about a minute later, it did it again, and again, this time softer, coming from farther down the aisle, toward the loading ramp. I stepped out from behind a stack of pallets and stood there, listening. No voices, no forklifts, no footsteps. Just the rain hammering the roof and the low growl of thunder rolling through the mountains. After maybe 10 seconds, I went back to work. Tried to, at least. Then the light above me sputtered and died. The next one in the row blinked out a moment later. Everything else stayed on, leaving a perfect tunnel of darkness stretching from where I stood to the far wall. It was too exact, like someone had drawn the line on purpose. I shifted forward, one slow step at a time, and as soon as I crossed the invisible boundary, the scanner's Wi-Fi came back. Little green light flicked on like nothing had happened. I told myself it was a surge, maybe a faulty breaker. The panels in this place were older than I was. Maintenance barely touched this wing anymore. It was an easy excuse, but something about it still didn't sit right. By 7:55, I had finally finished the pallet I was working on and rolled it toward the scales at the far wall. There, behind a half-collapsed set of caged racks, sat an old office. Small, box-shaped, 2 windows, and a warped door that dragged against the concrete. It used to be where the zone supervisors worked, back when Sector E ran full shifts, but now it was just an empty relic. The ceiling tiles sagged inward, and the far wall was covered in brown water stains that looked like they'd been growing for years. I usually ignored that office, but as I passed it that night, something caught my eye. Someone was inside. A tall figure, standing in the far corner, facing the wall. I stopped dead in my tracks. My first thought was that it had to be one of the drivers waiting out the storm, but the longer I looked, the less sense that made. They weren't moving at all, just standing, arms at their sides, head tilted slightly forward. I couldn't make out clothes, couldn't see a face, just a human shape, black against the faint glow of the window. I blinked once. The office was empty. The space where the figure had been was bare, untouched. My stomach tightened, not quite fear yet, but something close. I walked up to the door and pushed it open with one hand. It scraped against the floor, loud in the silence. The air inside was colder, not cool, but cold in a way that didn't belong indoors, like the air had stopped moving completely. It smelled faintly of rust and damp paper. I checked behind the door, under the desk, even inside the old file cabinet that sat wedged against the wall. Nothing. Not even footprints in the dust. It had to be a reflection. The glass in the windows was so grimy that light bounced around weirdly in here. Maybe it had caught my own shadow when I passed. That was all. I was tired. The storm was getting worse, and I was working in a part of the building that hadn't felt alive in years. Then the intercom popped again, this time louder, longer. A burst so sharp I flinched. When I stepped back into the aisle, the pallet I'd rolled was right where I'd left it. But something clattered softly behind me. Metal hitting concrete, light but deliberate. I turned fast. The office door was closed. I hadn't touched it. That door didn't even shut right. You had to yank it hard past the warped frame to keep it closed. I'd left it half open. I knew I had. I moved closer, one step at a time, and nudged it open with the end of my scanner. The door creaked, slow, reluctant. The room looked exactly the same, except now, across the inside of the window, Smeared through the thick dust were 5 jagged letters. Leave, written from inside. The strokes uneven and frantic, too high for a child, too rushed for paint. It looked like someone had dragged their fingers through the grime in a hurry, pressing deep enough to leave streaks that cut straight through the dust. I took a step back, pulse starting to hammer in my ears. Tried to call Lance, the night supervisor, over the radio. Nothing, just static. Tried again, still nothing. That was enough. I turned and started walking toward the center aisle, faster than I meant to. The sound of my boots echoed sharp against the concrete, too loud in the emptiness. I passed row after row of shelving, forklifts parked neatly against the wall. Everything still. Too still. No voices, no clanking of metal, no distant chatter from the dock. Just the endless hum from Sector D, faint and steady, like it was the only part of the building still alive. The break room was empty when I reached it. No lunch bags, no coffee cups, no half-eaten sandwiches left on the counter. The clock above the sink had stopped ticking, its red second hand frozen between numbers. It didn't feel like everyone was on break. It felt like everyone had simply vanished. At 8:27, every single light in Sector E went out at once. Not a flicker, a total blackout. The scanner in my hand died instantly, its small screen turning black. Then the intercom crackled to life one last time. At first, it was just static, but then came something else. A whisper, stretched and broken, almost like a name but too garbled to understand. The sound was close. Too close. It slid across the air, crawling up the back of my neck. It wasn't a voice you could mistake for machinery or interference. It was human, low, drawn out, breathing between the words. I froze, barely breathing, trying to tell myself it was feedback. But the whisper came again, clearer this time, though not enough to form words. It felt like it was right behind me. I didn't stay to find out. I ran. Through the aisles, past the pallets, through the open bay doors that screamed against their hinges. I didn't stop until I hit the parking lot. My gloves were still in my back pocket, soaked through from the rain. I didn't bother to grab my bag, didn't clock out, just got into my car and drove. The storm was still pounding when I reached my apartment. I didn't turn on the lights, just sat at the kitchen table with my phone face down, staring at the black window pane that looked out toward the dark ridgeline beyond town. At 11:42, my phone rang. It was Lance. He said the power in Sector E had gone out for exactly 29 minutes. The backup generator kicked in at 8:56. He wanted to know why I'd left without a word. I told him I'd gotten locked in the sector when the outage hit. He paused, then said, "That's strange. The bay doors have been stuck open for over a week. They don't lock." I didn't have anything to say to that. He asked if I was all right. I told him I just needed a couple days. He said, "Okay." I never went back. Even now, when thunder rolls through the Blue Ridge valleys and the lights flicker for just a moment, I can still hear that whisper. Low, slow, too close, saying something I hope I never understand. I was working at a warehouse just outside Hollow Creek, a forgotten stretch of industrial land, wedged between old rail lines and a few miles of tangled back roads. It wasn't really a town, just a scattering of factories, shipping depots, and a couple of diners that never closed. We handled defective and returned merchandise for one of those big box companies, the kind that churns through millions of products a month. Most of it was busted electronics, cracked tablets, shorted chargers, headphones with one ear dead, phones that lit up for a second before going dark again. My job was the same every shift. Scan the barcode, note the condition, toss it into the right bin, and move to the next one. I'd been there almost 3 years. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and you didn't have to talk much. The warehouse itself was a long, sagging metal structure that backed right up to the Allegheny foothills. The place always smelled faintly like burnt wiring, like the air itself carried leftover static. The lights overhead were mostly dead, and the few that still worked buzzed like trapped flies, painting everything in a cold yellow film. None of us cared. We weren't there for comfort. I usually worked in Zone D, tucked along the main corridor. It was quieter there, out of sight, out of mind. You could keep your head down and let the hours slide past unnoticed. That day was in early August, around 3:40 in the afternoon. I remember because I'd been checking the clock obsessively, waiting for my first break. My scanner had frozen up again, and every reboot took a solid 5 minutes. I was tapping my gloves on the steel table, counting the seconds, when the speaker system above us screeched out a weather alert. "Severe storm approaching. Take precautions." Nobody flinched. Summer storms were constant in Hollow Creek. But then the sky outside the loading dock started changing. It went dark in seconds. Not the gradual fade of dusk, just a sudden shift, like someone pulled a tarp over the world. A few of the guys joked about tornadoes, but I didn't laugh. The air pressure dropped, and the ceiling panels trembled. I'd barely picked up my scanner again when the lights surged once, dimmed, then cut completely. My scanner screen flickered, beeped twice, and shut off. The room fell into silence. No machines, no conveyor belts, no hum from the fans, just the roar of rain hammering the roof. It wasn't normal rain either. You could feel it vibrating through the floor, a low rhythmic pounding that made your teeth buzz. I looked around. Every workstation light was red, standby mode. I expected someone from management to call out over the intercom, but nothing came. After a minute or so, the emergency floods kicked on. Dull orange. They made everything look worse, like we were inside a dying furnace. The others in my zone were gone, probably slipped off to the break room or outside for a smoke before the storm hit full. I thought about doing the same until I saw something at the end of the main aisle, down near Zone H. Someone was standing there. I could just make them out through the orange haze, a figure in the same gray uniform as the rest of us, completely still. I thought maybe it was Tommy, one of the shift leads. He was tall and thin, always wearing his sleeves rolled up. But something about the way this person stood didn't look right. Their arms were locked tight to their sides, elbows straight, head tilted slightly to the left, like it was too heavy. I called out, "Hey, everything okay down there?" No answer, no movement. I took a few steps forward. My boots echoed on the concrete. Halfway down the aisle, I slowed. There was a thin black streak running down the side of their face, from temple to chin, like a crack in porcelain. The lights flickered again, bright for half a second, then back to orange. When they steadied, the figure was gone, completely gone. I kept walking, forcing myself not to turn around. I checked the side aisles, peered behind the skids and broken shelving. Nothing. The emergency exit at the end of the corridor was still bolted from the inside. No footprints, no sound. I stood there, listening. The rain outside was still pounding, louder now, and every few seconds, thunder rolled through the valley, shaking dust from the rafters. I turned and went back to my table. My scanner had rebooted somehow, its green light blinking like nothing had happened. I tried to focus on work, scan, sort, repeat. But something felt off. The air felt heavier, like breathing through damp cloth. Then I noticed one of the boxes from the pile beside me was missing. Just gone. I scanned the floor, thinking maybe it had fallen, but there was nothing. Then I heard it. A faint scraping sound behind me, slow and steady, like plastic dragging over cardboard. I turned around. The noise came from the pallet stacked behind my station, wrapped tight in layers of clear film. I froze and listened again. Another sound. Not a scrape this time, a dragging shift, heavier, like something trying to move its weight. I crouched and peeled a corner of the plastic back. Inside were rows of busted printers and monitors stacked haphazardly. And wedged between them, something moved. Not fast, not twitchy, just a slow repositioning, like something stretching its shoulders after being still too long. I dropped the plastic and stepped back, nearly tripping over a bin. I shouted, "Anyone there?" My voice echoed down the corridor, unanswered. Pulled out my phone. No signal, not even emergency bars. Just no service. Then everything went black again. Not the dim orange of backup power, complete darkness. My eyes couldn't even find shapes. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. Then I fumbled for my phone flashlight, thumb shaking as I turned it on. The narrow beam cut through the black, showing the same aisles, the same machines. Everything looked fine. Too fine. I decided to get out. Screw procedure. I didn't care about clocking out or waiting for instructions. I started down the corridor toward the loading dock. My footsteps echoed weirdly, like the sound was bouncing back faster than it should. When I reached Zone G, something blue flickered in my peripheral vision. One of the computer monitors was on. It shouldn't have been. Power was out. But there it was, glowing faint blue, humming faintly. The screen showed a grainy black and white feed, a security camera view of the corridor. My corridor. At first, I thought it was old footage, maybe a recording. But then I noticed the timestamp at the top corner, 3:58:12 p.m. It was live. And on the screen, I saw myself. Same uniform, same gloves, same build, walking down the aisle. The camera was behind me. Something was following me. I spun around. Nothing. The beam from my phone shook as I started running. I didn't stop until I reached the side exit. The bar on that door wasn't supposed to open unless the fire alarm triggered. But when I slammed it, it gave way instantly. I stumbled into the rain, soaked within seconds. The air was cold and sharp. Lightning flashed close enough to burn white behind my eyes. I sprinted across the gravel lot to my car, boots sliding in the mud. As I yanked the door open, I looked back toward the warehouse. The side door I'd come through was wide open, swinging in the wind. And in the doorway stood a figure, gray uniform plastered to their body, arms rigid, head tilted, watching. I don't remember starting the car. Just the sound of tires spinning on wet gravel as I tore out of the lot and onto the road. My hands were trembling so badly, I could barely hold the wheel. I called Riley, my supervisor, while I was still driving. He answered on the second ring, calm as ever. Said the storm had knocked the power out for 15 minutes, but the generators had kicked in fine. He said everyone had already been sent home an hour ago. That stopped me cold. I asked if anyone had been near Zone D when the lights went out. He said no. That section had been shut down for cleaning since last Thursday. Said all the pallets from there had already shipped. I didn't say another word. Just hung up. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound, the creak of the house settling, the tick of the kitchen clock, made my skin crawl. Around 2:47 a.m., my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. One message. Don't look behind you. I dropped the phone and didn't touch it again until morning. The next day, I emailed HR and quit. No explanation, no notice. I haven't been back to Hollow Creek since. Sometimes, though, when the storms roll through the Alleghenies and the sky turns that deep, heavy black, I catch myself thinking about that warehouse, about the sound of plastic dragging across cardboard, and I wonder if someone's still standing there, waiting for the lights to go out again. My overnight inventory shifts at the Clearfield Home Outlet always started at 8:30 p.m., running straight through till sunrise. It was one of those discount home stores off the main stretch of Route 43, about 40 minutes outside Roanoke, tucked near the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Usually, it was just me, Greg, the floor supervisor, and Tanya, a part-timer who'd started the week before. We spent the long nights unpacking shipments, scanning the inventory, and logging the broken items for returns. It was easy work once you got used to the rhythm. The hum of the lights, the soft buzz of the scanners, the steady thud of rain on the metal roof when storms rolled through the hills. That night felt no different at first. The air had been heavy all day, the kind that makes your hair stick to your skin. By 9:15, the storm had arrived, low thunder crawling through the mountains, and the wind whipped across the back loading dock, rattling the bay doors hard enough that the chains hanging from the ceiling swung on their hooks. I was in the seasonal aisle, scanning boxes of decorative lights, when the building shuddered from a close lightning strike. The overhead lamps flickered once, then again, then went black. We lost power all the time when it stormed. The wiring in that old place was a joke, but it usually came back quick. That time, though, it didn't. The dark hung thick for what felt like a full minute before the backup lights clicked on, bathing everything in that syrupy orange glow that made the aisles feel smaller. Greg called from the front, saying the registers had reset and would take a while to reload. Tanya was down by aisle 10, sorting out garden decor. He told me to check the breaker panel in the back office, even though I'd never been back there alone before. The hallway to the office was darker than the rest. Only one emergency light worked, and it was blinking slow and weak. I used my phone's flashlight, its white beam catching flashes of half-open boxes and stacks of paint cans. The storm beat the roof like a drum, and every now and then, the wind made the walls creak. Halfway down the corridor, I heard something that stopped me cold. It wasn't footsteps. It was slower, heavier. A dragging noise, like fabric or rope being pulled unevenly across concrete. It came from farther down the hall, from around the bend near the manager's office. I froze, listening hard. The noise stopped. After a moment, I forced myself forward. When I reached the office, the door was cracked open. That wasn't right. Greg always locked it, even if he was inside. I called out for him. No answer. The smell hit me first, musty like rain-soaked carpet or wet cardboard. I pushed the door open with my shoulder, just enough to shine the light in. The room was empty. Desk, chair, filing cabinet. Nothing else. But on the tile floor, catching the weak beam from my phone, were wet footprints. Bare feet, small, like a child's. They started just inside the door, trailed toward the center of the room, then stopped. No return prints, no drips. Just a line of damp marks, ending in dry tile. I whispered, "What the hell?" before backing out and shutting the door behind me. When I found Greg, I told him what I saw. He laughed, told me the storm was just getting in my head, and said to get back to work. I tried, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking when I picked up the scanner again. About 20 minutes later, Tanya came down the aisle toward me, looking pale. She asked if I'd heard anyone knocking on the back delivery door. I said no, and she told me it had happened twice. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, pause, 1 knock. She even tapped it out on a shelf, a soft rhythm that made the hair rise on my arms. I told her it was probably the wind, but she didn't look convinced. The storm kept growing louder. By 1:00 a.m., the wind was howling like a freight train. Greg was still cursing at the registers up front, and Tanya was repacking boxes of string lights. I went to the break room for a minute, just to clear my head. I'd barely unwrapped a granola bar when the lights flickered again. Bright white for a second, then half the store went dark. The front aisles stayed bathed in that amber emergency light, but everything in the back half, the break room, the storage hall, the loading area, came back on fully powered. It looked unnatural, split right down the middle like someone had drawn a line through the building. Then came the crash. A metallic bang so loud it shook the air vents. Greg shouted from the front for us to check the garden section. Tanya didn't want to go alone, so I went with her. We turned the corner and froze. One of the display racks had completely collapsed. Ceramic garden statues lay shattered on the floor. Frogs, turtles, gnomes, all in pieces. But everything was wet. The floor, the shelves, the boxes, even the walls glistened like they'd been sprayed with a hose. The puddles shimmered under the light, perfectly clear, no mud or grime, just clean water. I looked up for a leak. Nothing. No busted pipe, no wet ceiling tile, just dry plaster. Greg showed up behind us, muttering under his breath. He didn't say much, just stared for a long minute, and then told me to grab a mop. As I bent down, something caught my eye under the lowest shelf. A tiny boot. Blue, covered in faded cartoon whales. A child's rain boot, half full of filthy brown water that smelled like rot. We didn't sell anything like that. I held it up. Greg went pale and said, "Lock the doors." I ran to the front. The doors were already locked, but when I looked closer, the glass was fogged from the outside. Weird. It wasn't cold enough for condensation. I wiped a spot with my sleeve. That's when I saw it. A face, small, pale, blank, pressed close to the glass. It disappeared in an instant. I couldn't even breathe. My reflection stared back at me from the wet glass, warped and trembling in the light. I ran back to the others and told them exactly what I'd seen. Tanya wouldn't believe me, said it was probably my reflection. Greg didn't say a word. He just went back to stacking the broken pieces, his movements slow, mechanical. After that, everything felt wrong. The air felt thicker. The orange emergency lights hummed lower than before, like the power grid was straining to stay alive. By 2:40, I was too shaken to work. I went to the locker room to grab my hoodie and my phone. When I opened my locker, my phone screen lit up with a new message. Unknown number. You left the back door open. That was it. No name, no history. My stomach turned cold. I'd locked that door myself earlier, double-checked it. Still, I went to confirm. The bolt was tight, solid. As I turned to leave, something shifted behind the stack of crates near the service elevator. A quick shuffle, too fast to mistake for wind. I shone my flashlight. Just for a second, I saw something pale slip through the gaps between the boxes and vanish into the shadows. That was enough. I ran. Found Greg and Tanya in the hardware aisle. They were arguing. She said she'd seen someone walking past the end of the row, and he kept saying it was the lights playing tricks. Before I could speak, every single light in the building died at once. Total black. The sound of the rain outside grew deafening. Then, one by one, alarms began blaring. Fire alarms, motion detectors, emergency strobes, all of them screaming at once. Red lights strobed across the walls. Greg tried the alarm panel, slamming buttons, shouting over the noise, but nothing responded. We ran for the front. Greg threw open the emergency gate, and we stumbled out into the downpour. The parking lot was empty, the asphalt gleaming under the storm. We stood there, soaked and shivering, staring through the glass doors. Something moved inside. A figure, small, walking slow between the aisles. Then the emergency lights cut off for good, and the whole store went black. We waited there until dawn, not saying a word. When the morning shift arrived, Greg told them the storm had caused a short circuit. He called corporate, said it was just faulty wiring. Tanya and I didn't correct him. We both quit that day. That was 6 months ago. I work days now. I don't stay anywhere past 6 p.m. anymore. But sometimes, when the sky goes gray over the Blue Ridge and the rain hits the windows hard enough to shake the glass, I think I hear that dragging sound again. Slow, uneven, moving closer, like something that still remembers the shape of wet footprints on tile. It was a Thursday night, and I was babysitting for a family I'd sat for a handful of times before. They were polite in that slightly distant way, the kind that made you feel like a guest, even when you'd been there a dozen times. Always paid in cash, always stocked the pantry with snacks I liked, and always left their Wi-Fi password on a sticky note by the fridge. Their house was just outside Maple Hollow, a quiet stretch tucked near the base of the Blue Ridge Highlands, surrounded by whispering pines and gravel driveways that went on forever. Their son, Eli, was 6, sharp as a tack and absolutely obsessed with space, planets, rockets, black holes. He knew facts I'd never even heard before. His constant companion was a stuffed astronaut he called Commander Zed, with one arm that had been sewn back on more than once. His parents were headed to a dinner party that evening. They said they'd be back by 10:30, gave me the rundown about bedtime routines, and left around 6:45 in their dark sedan, its headlights disappearing down the long gravel road. The rain started at about 7:15, soft at first, like fingertips drumming the windows. Eli and I were in the living room, working on a rocket base made of couch cushions and blankets. He barked orders like a tiny mission commander, telling me where the launch control needed to go and how the fuel module, a couch pillow, was critical to the mission. The lights flickered once, just once, long enough for me to glance at the lamp, but not long enough for Eli to notice. "Can we watch a movie in the rocket base?" he asked. I smiled, nodded, and set up the tablet inside the blanket fort. By 7:45, the thunder was rolling closer. One flash of lightning lit the yard like daylight, revealing every wet leaf, every dripping branch. The boom came right after, sharp enough that Eli's little shoulders jumped. He asked in a whisper if the storm could get into space. I told him no, that storms stayed on Earth. That answer seemed to satisfy him, and he went back to watching his movie with Commander Zed tucked under his chin. By 8:15, the rain had grown heavier, slamming against the siding so hard it sounded like handfuls of gravel. The house, which was already big and full of strange corners, began to feel emptier without the parents there. I caught myself glancing toward the hallway every few minutes. Too many open doors, too many dark spots where the light didn't quite reach. I told myself to stop being weird, got up, and did a quick sweep. All the windows were shut, except one, the one at the top of the stairs, open just an inch or two. I pulled it closed, locked it, and didn't think much more about it. When I came back down, Eli had fallen asleep in the fort, tablet still flickering light across his face. At 8:40, I heard it, a faint thud from upstairs. Not a crash, not even loud enough to make me jump. Just something small, like a book sliding off a shelf. I paused, listening. Eli didn't stir. I sat frozen for maybe 10 seconds, then told myself it was the storm. Maybe the wind had knocked something over. Still, I stood up, just to check. The upstairs hallway was dim. The only light came from the small blue nightlight near the bathroom. I peeked into the parents' bedroom. Empty, bed neatly made. Then into Eli's room. Just toys, clothes, and a jumble of picture books. Nothing out of place. Then I saw it. The attic door. It hung open about 4 inches, just enough to show the deep black beyond. The string pull swayed slowly, back and forth, like it had been tugged only moments ago. I knew it hadn't been open earlier. I'd looked right at it when closing that hallway window. My stomach sank in that quiet, cold way that's worse than fear. I didn't touch the door. I turned, walked back downstairs, locked the front door, double-checked the back one, and stood in the kitchen trying to convince myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe a pressure change from the storm, maybe air from the ducts, maybe. At 9:25, the power went out. All at once, the house went silent. No hum from the refrigerator, no cartoon sounds from the tablet, just the drumming of rain and distant thunder. Eli kept sleeping somehow. I used my phone's flashlight and texted his parents, "Hey, power's out, but everything's okay." I waited for the "delivered" checkmark, but it didn't come. The signal bar flickered and disappeared completely. The house felt wrong without light. It wasn't just dark. It was heavy. I sat back down on the couch, trying not to stare toward the hallway. Every small creak of wood sounded too deliberate. 10 minutes later, another sound. Not faint this time. A sharp, heavy thud from upstairs, like something big hitting the floor. I froze. Eli jolted awake inside the fort, blinking through the dark. "Where's the light?" he whispered. I told him the power was out, that everything was fine, and grabbed my phone. We went to the kitchen together to find a flashlight. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Wet, muddy, clearly human. Starting from the back door, trailing across the tile toward the hallway. There were only a few, but they were fresh, still glistening in the faint glow from my phone. Eli had been asleep. I hadn't gone near the back door. No one else was supposed to be here. I grabbed the largest knife from the kitchen drawer and pulled Eli close. My hands were shaking as I typed another message to his parents. Someone might be in the house. No signal, just the little spinning wheel trying to send. Then came a knock at the front door. 3 knocks, slow, spaced apart. Every sound in the world stopped after that. Even the rain seemed to fade. I didn't move. Eli clung to my leg, face buried against my hip. The knocks came again, exactly the same rhythm. No voice, no doorbell, just 3 slow thuds. I turned off my phone flashlight and whispered to Eli to stay quiet. We backed into the pantry, the only windowless room on the first floor. I closed the door, soft as I could, pressing it shut until it clicked. We stood there in total darkness. The only sounds were our breathing and the storm outside. I could feel my pulse pounding in my throat. I kept one arm around Eli. the other clutching the knife. A few minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time didn't feel real anymore. Then, faint but clear, came another noise. From upstairs again, a dragging sound, slow, steady, something heavy being pulled across the floor. Then came the creak, the sound of the attic ladder unfolding, its old metal hinges protesting as it was pulled down. Eli whispered, "Is someone up there?" I squeezed his shoulder. "Don't talk," I mouthed, barely breathing. The dragging stopped. For a long while, there was nothing. Just silence and the sound of rain leaking through the gutters outside. At 10:20, the power came back on with a jolt. The lights flickered to life. The refrigerator hummed again. The hallway glowed warm and steady like nothing had happened. I waited another minute before opening the pantry door. The house looked exactly the same. No muddy footprints, no open doors, no sound from above. Eli whispered, "Is it gone?" I didn't know what to tell him. At 10:35, the front door opened. His parents came in, laughing about the weather, umbrellas dripping on the mat. They apologized for not responding, said they'd been up near the ridge. No reception at all. I didn't tell them about the attic, or the footprints, or the knocking. Just said the power had gone out, and the storm had freaked us out a bit. They smiled, thanked me for staying calm, and went upstairs to check on Eli. I sat there for a few minutes after they left, pretending to check my phone until my hands stopped shaking. Then I packed up my things, said goodnight, and drove home through the fog. I haven't been back to that house since. Sometimes, when thunder rolls through the Blue Ridge and the lights in my apartment flicker just once, I think about that attic door swinging open, the way the ladder groaned as it came down, and those muddy footprints that started from nowhere and ended in clean, dry tile. My car stalled just after I crossed the railroad tracks I usually take the long way around. It was Friday evening, and I'd just wrapped up a long day at the county clerk's office. Signatures, scanning, endless stacks of paper. The kind of day that drains your brain to static. Around 3:30, the sky turned that murky gray that warns you what's coming. By 4 o'clock, the thunder started. First distant, then closer, like it was rolling down the hills from somewhere unseen. When I finally shut down my computer and stepped outside, the rain had already started in fat, cold drops that turned the courthouse steps slick and black. By the time I made it halfway home, it was coming down in sheets. The wipers could barely keep up, and the world outside the windshield was a blur of lights and motion. Just past the old train crossing outside Pine Hollow, the car shuddered once, then died. I tried everything. Key in the ignition, pumping the gas, popping the hood, and jiggling the battery cable like I actually knew what I was doing. Nothing. Just the steady hiss of rain and the occasional flash of lightning slicing through the mist. It must have been 6:15 or so when I gave up. I shut the door, locked the car, and started walking. I didn't have my phone, left it charging at my desk like an idiot. No map, no umbrella, no way to call anyone. Just me and the rain. The main road had no shoulder, and cars kept roaring past, their headlights too bright, their tires spraying water that soaked me through in seconds. So I cut off onto the side streets. They were quieter, narrower, full of old houses I recognized from driving by, though they looked completely different through the storm. At night, with rain filling the air, even familiar places start to feel like you've never seen them before. The rain didn't let up. It pressed against me, pulling at my jacket, sloshing through my shoes. The thunder echoed so hard I could feel it in my ribs. I kept walking. Alleyways, small yards, a row of closed garages. Every few blocks, a car would pass, and I'd step into the shadows to let it by. I was halfway through the neighborhood when I saw him for the first time. He was sitting on the curb across the intersection. No coat, no umbrella, just sitting there with his elbows resting on his knees, hands hanging loose, head bowed. The rain hit him, just like it hit me. But he didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even look up. For a few seconds, I just stared, trying to decide if I should say something or keep moving. My heartbeat picked up, though I couldn't explain why. He didn't seem threatening, just wrong somehow, like a mannequin that had been left outside too long. I turned and crossed the street, keeping to the opposite side. I walked faster than before, eyes straight ahead. I made it a full block before I risked glancing back. He was gone. The curb was empty. I told myself it didn't matter. People stood outside in the rain sometimes. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe. A flash of lightning split the sky, lighting up the street like day for half a second. He was standing at the end of a driveway, back turned to me. Same slouched shoulders, same limp arms. My stomach clenched. There was no way he could have moved that fast. I stopped walking. For a moment, the only sound was the steady rush of rain. When the next flash came, he was gone again. I kept walking, fast. The air smelled like wet asphalt and ozone. A few minutes later, I passed the mouth of an alley and, out of habit, glanced in. He was there, kneeling this time, palms pressed flat to the pavement. His head tilted down like he was listening to something under the ground. My breath caught. I didn't move. Then, slow as clockwork, he turned his head toward me. The motion wasn't natural. It was too smooth, too slow. His eyes locked on mine, not blank, not crazed, just far away, distant, like he was looking through me instead of at me. I forced myself to move. My shoes slapped the wet pavement as I half walked, half jogged away. I didn't look back. I told myself if I just kept moving, it would make sense later. The road curved around an old playground, one of those forgotten ones with metal swings and half-rotted wood. The kind of place you'd expect to hear laughter from in summer, but only silence now. I came around the bend and saw a single flickering streetlight up ahead. Underneath it stood the figure. Soaked clothes clung to him like another layer of skin. His feet were bare. He faced me this time, arms loose at his sides, head tilted slightly as if curious. The lightning flashed again, and for that instant, I thought I saw right through him, like his skin had turned to glass. Then it was gone, the illusion or whatever it was. I crossed to the other side of the street, clutching my keys so hard they bit into my palm. He stepped backward, slow, retreating into a recessed doorway, melting into shadow. I didn't stop walking. The neighborhood had gone quiet except for the rain. Every house was dark, every yard still. I started to shiver from cold and nerves. I wanted to believe I was imagining it. Then, 2 blocks later, I saw him again, half hidden by a hedge in someone's front yard, just standing, watching. That was it. I started to run. Up ahead, a man was standing under a porch light, a leash in one hand, his dog sniffing the edge of the driveway. I waved, desperate for the sight of another human being. He looked up, gave me a friendly wave back, and nodded. Relief hit me so hard I almost laughed. When I glanced over my shoulder, the figure was gone again. The houses started to look familiar. The bend of the road, the cluster of mailboxes, my street. My own home sitting at the end, its porch light off, everything dark and still. I slowed, catching my breath, soaked to the bone. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, quiet and rhythmic. And then I saw him. He was sitting on my porch, same position as before, elbows on knees, head bowed forward, water running off his arms. He was perfectly still. I stopped halfway up the driveway. My throat was dry. I called out, "Hey, do you need help?" My voice cracked halfway through. No movement, no sound. I tried again, louder this time. "You okay?" Nothing. Then, slowly, he stood. That was enough. I turned and bolted. I didn't look back. I sprinted to the next house. The Morrisons, 2 doors down. They were older, kind. The kind of neighbors who still handed out full-sized candy bars on Halloween. I pounded on their door, shouting over the rain until the porch light flicked on. Mrs. Morrison opened the door a crack. I must have looked insane, soaked, shaking, breathless. "Please," I said, "there's someone sitting on my porch." Her husband appeared behind her, a flashlight in hand. "Stay here," he said firmly. "I'll take a look." I followed him partway down the walk despite his protest. The rain had nearly stopped now, just mist hanging in the air. The neighborhood was still, too still. We reached my house slowly, scanning the yard, the porch, the steps. Empty, no footprints, no puddles where someone might have stood. Just water and silence. We stood there listening. Nothing. No thunder, no wind, not even crickets. After a minute, Mr. Morrison said quietly, "Looks clear to me." He gave me a sympathetic nod. Probably just someone passing through. Maybe. We walked back together. The clock inside their kitchen read 12:40 a.m. when I finally sat down with a mug of tea, my hands still trembling. Later, when the storm had fully passed, we walked back over one last time, just to check in daylight. The steps were clean, the railing dry. No marks, no footprints, no sign that anyone had ever been there. I never saw him again. But I don't walk home in the rain anymore. Not even short distances. Not since that night, when every flash of lightning seemed to bring him closer, until there was nowhere left for him to stand but my porch. We had just settled into an old duplex, tucked into a quiet patch of northwestern Georgia, near the edge of the Blue Ridge foothills. The place had been standing for nearly a century, though it felt less historic and more tired. My wife, Lydia, had gone to visit her brother in Chattanooga for the week, leaving just me and our mutt, Scout, surrounded by towers of half-open boxes and rain-speckled windows. I'd planned to spend the evening unpacking the essentials, maybe ordering takeout, but that was before the storm rolled in. It started small, like most southern storms do. A distant rumble over the hills, a warning hidden behind the humidity. By late afternoon, the light outside dimmed to that murky greenish gray that always means trouble. Then the sky fell open. The thunder didn't even sound like thunder. It was too close, too solid, like metal grinding against metal. The rain hit so hard I could barely hear my own thoughts. Scout, normally brave enough to bark at thunder, started pacing circles around the living room. His tail was tucked, ears low, and every few minutes he'd stop and stare at a corner of the room, like something I couldn't see was sitting there. At 7:45, the power died. No flicker, no warning. 1 second, everything hummed. The next, it was dead quiet. Across the narrow street, all the other houses went dark too. No porch lights, no TVs, glowing through curtains, just the heavy sound of rain and an occasional flicker of lightning bouncing off puddles. I rummaged through one of the kitchen boxes until I found a few candles and a camping lantern. When I lit them, the shadows on the walls didn't seem right. Too tall, too slow to settle. The only other person in the duplex was my neighbor, Carl. We shared a wall, but I barely knew him. Late 40s maybe early 50s, with a sunburned face and clothes that looked permanently stained with paint or plaster. He always had the look of someone who'd been working on something long after the job ended. He mentioned once that he'd done wiring work for a construction firm out near Dalton, but that was it. Mostly he kept to himself. I was clearing space near the TV stand, trying to set up the router, when I heard 3 slow, deliberate knocks at the front door. Scout stopped pacing instantly. He didn't bark. He just looked at me, stiff, eyes wide. I got up, flashlight in hand, and checked the peephole. Carl stood there. No coat, no hat, no umbrella. Just a soaked shirt clinging to him, rainwater dripping from his hair onto the porch. He looked strange, not angry or upset, just worn out, like someone who hadn't slept in days. I cracked the door an inch. "Carl, you okay?" He blinked once, then said softly, "Did you hear it?" "Hear what?" I asked. He shook his head, like he was trying to clear something from his mind. He lifted his hand as if to knock again, then dropped it, turned, and walked away. No explanation, no goodbye, just gone, swallowed by the rain. I locked the door again and stood there, trying to make sense of it. Scout pressed close to my leg, trembling. 10 minutes later, something scraped along the side of the house. A long, slow drag, like fingernails or metal claws raking across the siding. I froze. The sound came again, lower this time, closer to the ground. Scout started growling, deep and quiet. I grabbed the flashlight and moved toward the back door. Outside, the rain had softened just enough that I could see the backyard. Overgrown bushes, a leaning fence, mud pooling under the oak tree. Everything looked the same, except for one thing. The window screen above the laundry room was bowed outward, like something inside had pushed against it. My stomach went cold. I stepped closer, shining the light on the frame. No footprints, no torn mesh, no broken glass. Just that bulge, small but impossible to ignore. I went back inside and locked everything. Every latch, every deadbolt, even the interior doors I'd left open earlier. Then I pulled the blinds shut and left only the candle burning on the mantel. Scout finally lay down in the corner, but he wouldn't close his eyes. The storm raged for hours. Every thunderclap rattled the floorboards. Every gust of wind made the old windows shiver in their frames. I tried to distract myself, checked the weather app, refreshed the outage map, anything to feel like I still existed in the same world as other people. I must have dozed off for a while, sitting upright on the couch. When I woke, the candle had burned low, and my phone said 11:50 p.m. I hadn't woken because of thunder. I'd woken because of footsteps above me, heavy, deliberate, pacing back and forth. The problem was, my unit didn't have an upstairs, just an attic crawl space that ran above both halves of the duplex. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the vibrations through the wood, hearing the faint, rhythmic creak. Scout had already wedged himself under the couch, growling so low it sounded like a distant engine. I crept down the hallway, flashlight trembling in my hand, and stopped under the attic hatch. It was still sealed, but the air felt wrong, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees, like the house had leaned slightly out of alignment. The air smelled faintly of wet dirt and copper. At 12:20, someone knocked on the front door again. This time it wasn't slow or uncertain. It was frantic, urgent. I nearly dropped the flashlight. I didn't want to answer. Every nerve in my body told me not to. But something about the rhythm of the knocks made it impossible to ignore. I cracked the door open. Carl again. He looked worse now. His skin was pale and tight, and his eyes darted behind me like he was checking to see if something had followed. His voice came out rough, almost like a whisper. "You need to come with me." I said, "Right now." "No," I told him. "I'm not going anywhere." He leaned closer, rainwater dripping off his chin. "You don't understand. It's in the walls." I slammed the door shut before he could say anything else, threw the deadbolt, slid the chain, and backed away. My heart hammered so hard I could barely hear over it. Scout barked once, a sharp, panicked sound. Then something hit the side of the house. Not like a branch or debris. This was heavier. A thud that shook the frames on the walls, followed by another and another, each one closer. When the last one came, something slid under the front door, a folded piece of paper soaked around the edges. I waited a long minute before picking it up. It was one of those maintenance notices from the landlord, the kind they leave when they've checked your smoke alarms or pest control. Only this one had words scrawled across it in shaky pencil. "It's your turn now. Don't make noise. No name, no date." I sat awake the rest of the night, waiting for another sound, another knock. Nothing came. Just the storm, easing in waves, the lightning flashing across the windows like camera bursts. Every time the light flickered, I expected to see a figure outside, but the yard stayed empty. By morning, the rain had stopped. I called the non-emergency line, told them I wasn't sure what I was reporting, just that something strange had happened during the power outage. The operator said they'd make a note of it. That was all. I didn't see Carl that day, or the next. 3 days later, 2 maintenance guys showed up next door. They went in with a master key and stayed maybe 20 minutes. When they came out, one of them shook his head and muttered something I couldn't catch. That afternoon, the property manager called. She said Carl had canceled his lease and left during the night. No explanation, no forwarding address. He didn't even take his tools, she said. Kind of weird, right? Then she asked if I wanted to lease his half of the duplex too. Said she could give me a good deal since it was vacant now. I told her no. That night, I lay awake long after the lights were off, listening to the walls settle. Every so often, I swear I hear faint footsteps above me, slow, careful, matching my own heartbeat. And when I look at the window across the room, sometimes the curtain sways just slightly, like someone outside is brushing past it in the dark.